Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this week, a very small milestone in podcast history as we reached the sequel to, I think, the first film we ever covered on Moderate Fantasy Violence. It's Deadpool 2. So, yeah, we've definitely been doing this a while now. I think we have had a couple of TV shows go round a couple of times, but this is the first film for us to go through a whole franchise cycle before it repeats on us. So yeah, we'll be talking about Deadpool 2, and then in honour of that bit of sequel trivia, we'll be asking the barely related question, are there any more unmade sequels we'd actually like to see? So yep, all that to come, but before I even ask Alistair if he's read any good books lately. Another thing we've done recently, if you enjoy listening to our sweet voices, we appeared on the And Then What podcast. We did briefly mention at the end of last episode, but I thought I'd put it up top this time since the episode is actually out now. But yeah, so if you go to And Then What pod on Twitter, or MFV podcasts on Twitter, or our Facebook page, or I'll try and put a link in the blog post for this episode. You should be able to find a link to our appearance on And Then What with the lovely Amy and Becky, where we talked about, well, Alistair talks about his pet subjects of lefty politics and film, and I talked about weird crime. And Amy and Becky talked about hospitals and ketamine. It's a surprisingly cheerful episode, considering everything I just said.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to record as well.
Yes, go for it. It's a lot of fun to record, and only a few bits that have to be very conspicuously edited out to stop us getting unemployed and or arrested. So yeah, that's our And Then What appearance. It's, even though we aren't reviewing any stories, because we felt like if we reviewed the stories it might get a bit awkward, it's still worth checking out, I think, if you enjoy this show. But, you know, also, you should listen to this episode of this show, which will now commence. Alistair, done anything lately?
Well, I went to the cinema to see a film that wasn't a superhero film, actually. Strange, yeah. In between seeing Avengers Infinity War for the last episode and Deadpool 2 for this episode, I went to see a film called Enterby. Those of you in London might have noticed it around. There's been posters for it on the tube. It stars Rosamund Pike. Yeah, it's a really interesting film. It's about Operation Enterby, as the name would suggest. That was an Israeli military operation to rescue a plane full of hostages that had landed in Uganda in 1976. It's a true story, or at least based on a true story of this anti-terrorist operation in the mid-70s. Yeah, it's a historical thriller type film. It's very well made. It's quite, it's tense, obviously. The thriller plot works quite well. This film seems to have split quite a few audiences because it's got this sort of strange visual metaphor in that it opens with this group of dancers doing this kind of modern dance, and it keeps, at various points in the film, cutting to these dancers. And over time, it kind of emerges that the soldier who's going to lead the raid itself, Operation Enterby, his girlfriend is a dancer, and she's rehearsing to be in this dance performance that it keeps cutting to, which some people have found has basically made the film quite strange. I thought it worked quite well because the theme of the film is rehearsal and building up to performance, in that you've got the first part of the film is about the hostage takers and their sort of preparation for building up to taking the hostages, hijacking the plane and flying to Uganda. Then there's the build up to the rescue operation, intercut with the build up of people rehearsing for this dance performance. So it was a sort of quite unusual visual metaphor. I think it worked quite well, but I can see why some people basically were like, why does this thriller keep cutting to people dancing in a slightly strange way?
To be fair, I read the Rotten Tomatoes page while you were talking, and it was less, why is it so crazy and weird, than this is dull, this is dull, this is boring, and felt like it was all for nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, they could have packed more punch. I was quite so entertained by the tension of it. I've been trying to think of like a film I can compare it to in the sense that was more tense. The best example I can come up with is One Day in September, which is a brilliant film, but it's a documentary using actual footage of the hostage taking during the Munich Olympics, which is I think 1972, so a few years earlier. And obviously when it's a documentary using actual footage, I guess that gives it an extra sense of immediacy. But that film does do a much better job of kind of really building up the tension and getting you hooked more, whereas Enterby is, I don't know, slower paced, to be kind.
The closest comparable film I think I've seen is probably Zero Dark 30, and that was quite good. I mean, I thought Zero Dark 30, I thought I did a lot of the build-up stuff quite well, and honestly kind of only lost me a bit when it went into the sort of the ending, which was a bit sort of generic military action film. I was far more interested in the bits of Jessica Chastain arguing with people about ethics, to be honest. So maybe Enterby just doesn't dramatise its arguments as well, I don't know.
Yeah, actually, that's probably the best comparison, a much better comparison than the one I came up with, is that Zero Dark 30 is a similar film, like based on, actual raid that took place and all about the kind of build-up and preparation, and that film is more tense. And so, and Entebbe is very similar in that there's a kind of a long build-up discussing the back and forths of it. And then again, same as Zero Dark 30, you get a sort of action scene on the end. Although in Entebbe, obviously, they keep cutting to the dancers, which is a bit different approach to Zero Dark 30.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like something I'd ever see, to be honest.
If you're interested in the period or sort of military thrillers, then I'd go see it. If you really like Zero Dark 30, actually, that's probably...
Yeah.
If you really like Zero Dark 30 and want something that's the same but set in the 70s, or similar, set in the 70s, then go see it. Nick, what have you been up to recently?
Well, the bit of culture that seems to have stuck with me most recently, even though it's very niche, is a podcast called The Weezer Bracket, where two American music fans who seem to have been following Weezer for the entire of their intermittent 11-album career have created a 64-song bracket, a sort of World Cup-style competition where two songs compete, and then the winner goes through to the next round, and then it goes down this bracket until there's only one song left. Except, of course, they're not trying to find the best Weezer song, they're trying to find the worst. Because, much as Weezer do have some good songs, they also are quite well known for, at this point in their career, among their own fans, for hacking out a lot of shit. So, this is a 64-song bracket to find the worst Weezer song, and as someone who's listened to all 11 Weezer albums at least a couple of times, and, many more times for the good ones, it's weirdly compelling. It's weirdly interesting to hear someone talk about, these quite unheard of, quite bad songs by a band that not that many people care about in an actual, serious, analytical way. I don't know, I just find that sort of thing weirdly interesting.
It's certainly a novel take to try and find the worst song, because I was about to say, I don't know, the best Weezer song, is it Buddy Holly, is it Hash Pipe? I mean, those are some classics.
It's probably Buddy Holly, but the worst, there's some more serious competition there. I think it sort of works with Weezer without feeling entirely like an entirely negative, horrible exercise in hatred, because they are weirdly up and down. Like, their most recent album is kind of boring, to be honest, but the two albums before that were really good, and then the 2 or 3 albums before that were kind of boring to bad. So they're very up and down, Weezer. There are some albums which are like 50% good and 50% bad. Anyway, probably don't need to hear my description of the whole of Weezer's career, but the Weezer bracket, you probably have to be at least reasonably into Weezer, but if you are, it's great. It's exactly the sort of, weird niche analysis that I feel podcasting was made for.
It sounds similar, actually, to what a friend of mine said to me. We're both really into Billy Bragg, and I love Billy Bragg, but someone did say, the thing about Billy Bragg is you can have a much longer and more interesting discussion about what the worst Billy Bragg album is than the best. Like, everyone agrees the best Billy Bragg album is Brewing Up with Billy Bragg, and like everyone can just argue for ages about which particular misstep was the worst. Same with James Bond films, actually. It's quite a short conversation about what's the best Bond film. You can talk for hours about which one's definitely the worst.
Really? I thought the worst James Bond film was pretty much universally received to be Die Another Day.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. I don't know. View to a Kill is pretty bad as well. That's the one when Roger Moore was ancient and he made that.
Oh god, I'd heard of that. Yeah, I must admit, I'm not a Bond expert, but I sort of absorbed the opinion that Die Another Day was seen as the nadir of the whole exercise.
Yeah, Moonraker's pretty bad as well, actually.
Wow,
I mean, again, we're already on there, but yeah, I can see how this would be really good fun if you were like a big Weezer fan.
Yeah, and there's a degree of affection, they're not being dicks about it. I mean, in some of them, they've had to find 64 songs to fill out these brackets, so although some of them are terrible, there are such songs as The Girl Got Hot from their very unadvisable late 2000s album Latitude.
Describing an album as unadvisable is a brilliant damning with faint praise.
There are a couple of okay songs on Latitude, but the rest of it is pretty terrible. There's another song with the brilliance in no way slightly odd title. If you're wondering if I want you to, I want you to.
That's going to keep me thinking for a while.
Most of it titles in brackets, but yeah, it's pretty terrible. And there's a song called Smart Girls, which was originally called Hot Girls, and you can tell because all he's done is change the title, because someone clearly told him it's a bit weird to sing a whole song going, Hot Girls! And so he's just changed it to Smart Girls, was apparently that's therefore more progressive. It's...
Okay.
There's also a song called Where's My Sex, which...
I don't want to know.
Oh yeah, but you do. It's called Where's My Sex, but it's actually about socks. The entire song is based on the fact that his young daughter, says socks in a way that sounds like sex. So he's written the whole song where he talks about his missing socks, except he says sex instead of socks, for 3.5 minutes. And that was somehow judged to be a good enough idea for a whole band to spend a few hours of their life recording it.
Oh dear.
That, funnily enough, has advanced to the second stage of the bracket. Yeah, although there are some genuinely really good, interesting, even emotionally affecting songs in Weezer's back catalogue, there's also enough of that sort of thing to keep the podcast going.
That sort of thing is probably a good summary. Don't you get tired of hearing the bad songs over and over as they progress through the brackets?
They haven't got past the first round so far, because there's 64 songs, so that's like 32 matchups, and they're doing like 4 a week, and they've only had like 5 episodes.
All right.
But they're only playing, like, for copyright reasons, I guess, they're only playing about 20-second clips of each bad song. Okay. So yeah, I am curious what's going to happen when it gets to the point where they're just discussing the same song, and then discussing it again 3 weeks later. We haven't got there yet. For now, it's all new material.
All right. Well, check back in when they get to the later stages and let us know how that's progressing.
I'm interested, yeah. I'm looking forward to it. At the very least, I'm looking forward to hearing them discuss the rest of the 64. As I say, it's a bit niche. You probably have to have a moderate interest in Weezer, but if you do, I strongly recommend this podcast. It's good.
It's beautifully niche. I absolutely love it. It's an amazing concept. First up this episode, we'll be reviewing Deadpool 2. As Nick has already said, Deadpool was the first film we ever reviewed on this podcast, and we liked it a lot, and we've been very excited to see the sequel. In this film, the wisecracking, self-aware, postmodern Deadpool has to pull together a team of badass superheroes to save a child from Cable, a time-travelling soldier who's come back from the future to kill him. Nick, did you think it lived up to the original?
I think it lived up to the original pretty much bang on, to be honest. I think possibly it feels a bit what I think we sort of talked about with Guardians of the Galaxy 2. There's a bit of the old sequel bloat in there, but, you know, it's clearly like, right, you like that, did you? Here's more. And there is a lot more. But there's just about, possibly more so than Guardians 2, to be honest, there's probably a bit more, enough actually new stuff for me to feel like they gave me more without just repeating themselves. Which, especially when the main thing you're there for is comedy, is more or less what I'm after. Because, although, you know, the balance is you don't want the same joke again, but you do want more of the same kind of joke. And that, I feel, is what they gave me. I laughed pretty much throughout, and the vague sort of joke style of this is deeply immature, and we know it's immature, so we're delivering it with just enough of a wink so you can laugh at both the stupidness of the joke and the fact that a grown man delivered that joke, and you, a grown man, or indeed woman, are laughing at it. So, yeah, there's a degree of having cake and eating it there, but that's very much in my wheelhouse, so I can confirm I both kept and devoured the cake. It was good. Yeah, I think it's a bit slow to start, possibly because they had to do a tiny bit of admin to kind of get around the ending of the first film so they could get back to Deadpool just being deeply stupid and self-destructive. Once Cable turns up and the plot hits the fan, it's pretty non-stop till the end. It's the exact about the right level of bloody violence, swearing and dick jokes with a fringe of pathos. The fringe of pathos possibly isn't quite as well developed as it was in the first film. I don't know if I quite felt the moral message they were trying to impart, but the jokes were sufficiently funny, but I don't know if I really care.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of what you said. They certainly have nailed that beat of the self-aware, incredibly rude, crude joke. In that sense of, I mean, it works well with the fact that Deadpool is a character who's aware he's a character in a work of fiction. So the whole thing is done in a very knowing way. In the sense that, we know this is immature and we know that it's funny because it's immature, which is kind of, gives it a sort of a sheen of maturity. You know, there's that level of self-awareness. It's not, I know, something like Dude, Where's My Car? But I liked it a lot. I thought it was very funny. I was worried, interested going in of whether this would be a sort of thing when, okay, that was funny the first time. Is it just a one-time sort of joke that only works once, or a one-time character? I think the most obvious comparison is with Austin Powers. Austin Powers is a little different because Austin Powers, I think, is a spoof of spies, whereas, and I think we'll get to this in a bit, I wouldn't say Deadpool is spoofing superheroes. It's a funny superhero film. But Austin Powers, the first one, is very funny and has a lot of great jokes in it, and then you watch the second one and it's just not as good. There's a definite diminishing returns, and the third one even more so. And I think it's because of what you said just now, I thought was spot on, which is you don't want the same joke again. You want the same kind of joke. And Austin Powers 2 falls into the category of giving you literally the same joke again in several instances, and obviously all jokes that are very similar. But this time they avoided doing literally the same jokes again. And there is also a sense they progressed it a bit by bringing in a wider cast of characters, which helped because they had more money this time. But yeah, having a bigger cast of characters meant that there was, that kind of changed it up a bit.
Plus, Deadpool's main shtick is making fun of people. So ultimately, if you want to broaden it and give him more things to say, just put him in front of different people, for God's sake.
Yeah.
That's probably why I guess most of the cast from the first film weren't actually in it that much.
Yeah.
Because, we've seen Blind Alfred's joke, she's blind, oh look, she's pointing a gun the wrong way. Not that it isn't still funny on the couple of occasions they do it, but they didn't milk it quite as hard this time, and similarly for his laconic barman sidekick, Weasel.
Yeah.
Don't reuse those jokes too much, you focus on the new characters who have new jokes.
Yeah, and there's less jokes about a Colossus being a massive square, and the teenage Megasonic Warhead being a sarcastic teenager. Those characters are in it, but they are sort of sidelined, and as they are characters that I liked a lot from the first one, I think part of me was felt that they could have done more with the characters I liked a lot from the first one, but then part of me was also thinking, to keep it fresh and keep it interesting, it's better that they moved up new characters like Cable and Domino.
Yeah, I think more of Negasonic Teenage Warhead doing the same laconic, sarcastic teen joke would probably have just fallen into repetition. So yeah, I think they could have given her a few more minutes, but I can't say they needed to, plaster her all over the film.
And the new characters worked really well. I thought Cable was great. I'm very much on Team Cable. If you remember that X-Men cartoon they did in the 90s when we were kids, the one with the amazing theme tune.
Yeah.
Cable was definitely my favourite character from that cartoon show. 10-year-old me liked the badass soldier from the future with all the guns and the big square jaw. That's what 10-year-olds like.
They didn't really draw huge amounts of attention to it as a joke, but I liked the sheer comical size of these guns Cable was just hefting out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And the fact that he had a dial on his gun that went all the way up to 11.
Yeah, that was good.
It's an old joke, but why not? Apparently, if nothing else, this will be the year of Josh Brolin playing villains with a vague point, or at least villains with an understandable motivation.
And they got in the joke as well that there's a bit when Deadpool tells Cable, calm down, Thanos, or something like that. That was a good sort of level of in-joke that the MCU fans, I'm sure, appreciated.
It was interesting that, this is very sort of deep nerdery, but it was interesting that in terms of the things they were willing to take shots at, they took quite a lot of shots at DC. They took a few shots at other Fox Marvel films, like other X-Men things, but they didn't take any real shots at the MCU. Clearly, Deadpool could do whatever he likes, but you can't torpedo the Fox Disney deal.
No, that is one thing. Also, he can't make fun of the coolest kids in the playground. I think Iron Man and Captain America are still very much top dog.
Well, yeah, but on the comedy rule of punching up, punching down, bluntly, you'd think the MCU is pretty ripe for a full-bore attack by someone like Deadpool, but clearly they weren't willing to go there at this exact point.
Yeah. Well, I think in the words of, I think it was David Baddiel, he said good satire should punch in every direction. But, they definitely went for DC quite a lot. But DC, I think, is the sort of, it's sort of punching up in that. It's this huge, bloated, over-invested mega franchise. You can't really claim they're the plucky underdog when they've got, Ben Affleck and Zack Snyder involved, and Joss Whedon. We're also making fun of DC's kind of darkness and seriousness, like the bit when Deadpool goes I'm Batman in a quite gruff voice, or when he's fighting Cable with his aggressive intensity, Deadpool says you're so dark, are you sure you're not from the DC universe? Those sort of jokes really kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of satirizing DC.
That's what you want from this. Yeah, as you say, it's not actually an intelligent superhero satire. It's actually just a superhero film with a lot of self-aware jokes in it. But, they've worked out how to do that in a way that works, so that they can have their emotional moments at the end, and you can sort of take it seriously, even as it's also clearly barely taking itself seriously.
Yeah.
And in terms of, servicing the superhero stuff, I think the ending was actually better than the first one. If I can find a criticism of the first Deadpool, I can't actually remember if I said this in my last review of it on this podcast, and I'm too scared of the low quality of the podcasting to go back and listen. Yeah, the ending of the first Deadpool is not the best part. It does just slightly break down to a slightly sort of standard fight the henchman, then the villain sort of brawl in a random empty warehouse yard thing. It wasn't the most exciting ending sequence. And the ending this time did feel a bit more structured and a bit more like there was actual visual stuff happening rather than just bash up the meat henchman and then bash up the dude.
Yeah, well, actually, this is a film that kind of breaks one of the rules, or to a degree that I have for films, which is, I think I've said this before, I think films, especially superhero films, at the end should come in and focus down. Whereas the ending of this film, I think, works quite well. Is the point when they have the biggest fight between all the different kind of characters they picked up along the way. But then right at the end, for the climactic scene, it does focus itself down on the core plot line, which is Cable wants to kill a kid. He's come back in time to kill a kid. It's a kind of obvious sci-fi trope, which is this kid will be awful in the future. I have to kill him now. And Deadpool being you can't kill a kid, he's still just a kid. despite whatever he does in the future. And it kind of comes back down to that kind of core essence of the film right at the end, which works well, which is, what makes it a good ending.
Well, yeah, and Deadpool being sort of, no, you can't just kill the kid. The kid still has a chance. We don't all have to go out to be awful. We're not doomed. Yeah, there's some sort of emotional core there. Deadpool, despite what he spends most of the time doing, isn't just, jokes. There's a fringe of something else there that does at least make the film work a bit better.
Yeah.
And yeah, as a few people have said in other reviews, this is surprisingly one of the more X-Men-y X-Men films. Like, this, in some ways, felt more like an X-Men story to me than quite a lot of the films that are actually called X-Men.
Well, I think that's partly because you could kind of imagine this being a sort of collection of issue stories in a regular comic sequence, in that there's a plot line, the guy's come back from the future to kill a kid, we have to stop him. I think the thing about, we might have discussed this before on the podcast, like the X-Men films, because they come out intermittently, like one every 2 years or whatever, there's a need for them to be really, really massive. In X-Men Apocalypse, like the whole world is going to literally be destroyed, where they don't ever do a kind of, this is just one mission sort of thing, because that would feel like, well, that's a bit flat next to like last film we destroyed the whole world. Why would we just do like regular X-Men mission? They lose that kind of sense of people going on missions from the story. But this one was, this seems like this is one straight up mission. There's a guy from the future, we have to stop him. I don't know, what do you think of that thesis?
I think there is an element of that, and I think the X-Men films have been particularly bad for it. Like, I think the Marvel films have allowed themselves to calm the fuck down and just do a story about Spider-Man fighting the Vulture or Thor escaping from the alien planet. Although I suppose he did then have to stop his world from being destroyed, so my thesis barely holds together. And even Guardians 2, although it did have, important stakes for the characters, it wasn't, holy shit, whole universe in peril. There was a degree to which it was, just a story. And I think the X-Men films have, for whatever reason, struggled to let themselves just do that. I mean, Days of Future Past wasn't bad for this. That did feel a bit more X-Men-y, but yeah, all the stuff that's meant to be there about, just the surrogate family coming together and helping themselves through against this prejudice and trying to send the positive message out into the universe. A lot of that seems to get a bit forgotten when all the films are just about people teaming up and then fighting. So, yeah, I did think they did that a lot better in Deadpool 2 than they have in the other films. And, characters like Domino, who haven't appeared that long, fitted into the little ensemble quite nicely. She didn't have that many scenes, but the scenes she did have, she stole quite effectively just on charisma and on the fact that her luck powers are actually quite cool and cinematic, no matter what Deadpool says.
Yeah.
Because again, the thing with X-Men stuff is there's sort of lots of mutants with cool powers, and the powers are actually meant to be, a bit more specific and a bit more, they can actually do something beyond just be good at fighting and, throw generic energy at each other. Which admittedly doesn't say much for Deadpool, whose main power is taking a beating, to be honest. Deadpool's main power is basically somewhere between Wolverine and Bugs Bunny. He can basically come back no matter how hard you hit him.
Yeah.
Which does at least lend itself to, certain types of action seekers where he can just hurl himself off things or around things, and you'll know he'll come back, which at least gives it, again, some kind of distinctive flavour. Whereas, I don't know if they've always done an amazing job with that in the other X-Men films, but to be honest, it's pretty much become a recurring theme whenever we have to review anything from the X-Men division of superhero films, that we sort of bemoan the fact that all the spin-off stuff is much better than the actual X-Men films. So, this is not new information.
No, you're right. What I liked about this film a lot is also a lot of what I liked about the first Deadpool. Obviously the sense of humour, but also the sense that this isn't we're not spoofing superheroes. The whole thing itself isn't inherently ridiculous. It's actually, as you say, fairly straight up X-Men movie, just with one character in it who's very, very silly, very crude, and also has this thing of being aware he's in a fictional story. Like, there's a bit when he's trying on the Cerebro headset and he's like, ooh, it smells like Patrick Stewart. Or something like that, Does he say at least he get a cameo from one of the main ones or something?
Colossus, the most important X-Man of all.
It was in X-Men 2, and I think X3 as well.
Considering the success of these Deadpool movies, I'm surprised they haven't moved, this version of Colossus over to the main films, but I guess that would involve actually working out the timelines.
Yeah. If you, edited out all the wisecracking dick jokes and the kind of postmodern self-awareness of Deadpool, you would have probably about 45 minutes of what is a functioning action movie. Like you say, there's a soldier from the future, they have to save a kid. You have to put together a team to take down a bigger badass. It's not winning any prizes for originality, but it functions as an action movie that just works. You can't take the humour out of Austin Powers. It's not, no one's on board for the spy story. But you could be on board this purely for the action, which is what I really like about it. It reminds me, I think I said this when we did review the original Deadpool, it's like the Blood and Cornetto movies, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and World's End, especially the first one, Shaun of the Dead, which is, if you take out the romantic comedy, you're left with a functioning, scary zombie movie. The zombies aren't funny. And, in this film, like, Cable isn't funny. He doesn't wisecrack. He doesn't do anything. He's a sort of masculine, gruff wall for Deadpool to bounce jokes off. But there isn't anything really funny about Cable in himself.
He's just a straight man, basically. Because of how Deadpool is, basically everyone is a straight man for Deadpool, but Cable is like the ultimate straight man.
Yeah. Whereas Dr. Evil isn't a serious Bond villain. He's clearly just a massive joke. But the zombies in Shaun of the Dead are scary. So that really appeals to me, this kind of genre hybrid stuff, locating funny characters in serious films, rather than just having films that are just inherently silly. Yeah,
it's the sort of thing you get a lot in comics because they're willing to do this sort of... I guess ultimately they could just afford to toss this sort of what might at the first glance seem like a slightly odd pitch out. I mean, Deadpool, famously, the film version, was bouncing around Hollywood for quite a while in script form because they just didn't think there was a market for a film that was basically not a comedy but also not a serious superhero film, just sort of a semi-serious superhero film with a lot of dick jokes. And evidently it turns out there is a gigantic market for that. You could be worried quite a lot of that market is teenage edgelords, but, nonetheless, they're out there.
It's about getting the tone just right, which is what they've got, in that they could have made the Dude, Where's My Car of superhero films, or they could have made something that's kind of basically a regular superhero film just with someone who cracks a few jokes, which wouldn't be a million times different from, Spider-Man Homecoming. And I can imagine that's why the script bounced around for a while, because they really had to nail, which they did in the end, that sense of humour, which is to get that kind of the irony and the self-awareness, which also makes the dick jokes work, and the fact that everyone is literally aware this is a silly kind of exercise in something that's sensible. So you have to really judge, get the tone right.
Something that's sensible. The inherent seriousness and meaningfulness of Hollywood superhero films.
Yeah.
As I always say, I enjoy that we've reached a point where superhero films by themselves are basically just part of the landscape, and now it's a skew take on superhero films. They're now entrenched enough that we're having films that are basically takes on them.
Yeah.
I like it, it's good.
It's been more than 20 years since the Blade franchise came out. I mean, superhero films have been around since the 70s, and Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman and Superman, and they kind of went out of fashion and then they came back.
I've heard rumours that they might do an X-Force movie instead of Deadpool 3, and I wouldn't entirely say no to that, because I feel like there is a degree to which this is a sort of film where going out while you're on top rather than dragging it on till we're all sick of it would work pretty well. But
yeah, I agree with that.
I'm not sick of it yet, so...
Yeah, I'm not sick of it either, but I was a little bit worried, like I say, what if this goes the way of kind of many funny films in the past, which is that joke worked once, but it's not going to work again, especially now that we're kind of wise to it. Similar to what you were saying about Guardians of the Galaxy, in that what makes the first one so good is it kind of blows you away because you're like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. I mean, I knew Deadpool was supposed to be violent and crude and sort of self-aware, but when I went into the film, I was like, wow, I really wasn't prepared for that. But when you're ready for it, and again with the Guardians of the Galaxy and the kind of the mix of the kind of 80s nostalgia and 70s nostalgia with the kind of the sense of humour and the space adventure, like the second time it's like, well, I'm prepared for this to be a winning cocktail, so you've got to impress me even more. But they did definitely live up to the hype the second time. In fact, probably more so, I think, than Guardians of the Galaxy 2 lived up to the expectations set by the original Guardians of the Galaxy, although Guardians of the Galaxy 2 was good and I did like it. I am still worried about, with Deadpool, the diminishing returns prospect. I mean, this time they made it better by putting in more characters. I guess the logical way to go is make the third one, an X-Force thing, very much focused on a group. Well, I don't want to keep adding more characters. It's clearly not the route to continue this being a success, or else it's just going to end up like Infinity War, and Deadpool's just going to be like a minor character. But I think they do need to kind of change it up again. Changing it up in this one worked well, so if they're going to do a third one, changing up more would also work well, so like making it an X-Force film rather than making it just Deadpool 3.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, I don't think they've commissioned it out or started on a sequel, so who knows.
Next, this episode, we will be discussing if there are any unmade sequels we would like to see. We've been doing this podcast for a while now, and we've covered quite a lot of films. We're very glad that Deadpool got a sequel, but what other gems have been passed over? Nick, any sequels you would like to see?
Well, full disclosure, folks, I came up with this question, and I found it quite hard to actually answer. I really should have actually considered what my answer was before I decided to do the podcast. But yeah, Hollywood has been alarmingly good at pumping out sequels to basically everything. So the number of films that could have had a sequel and haven't is actually quite low. I mean, at the time it came out, I wouldn't have said no to an Incredibles 2. But now we're on the verge of getting one, I kind of don't care that much. which is weird. But I watched the trailer and it still didn't successfully make me care. Like, I must admit, I quite enjoyed David Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I would have probably watched a sequel to that.
They adapted all 3 novels with Swedish films, so you could watch those.
I suppose I could do, yes. But I quite enjoyed Daniel Craig and his gruff, terrible accent, but they didn't make a sequel, so... And at this point, I'm going to assume they probably never will, because I imagine at least a few of the actors are now quite a bit older.
Yeah, Rooney Mara was very good as Salander, but I don't think that film was very successful.
I'm surprised it didn't, actually. It's, those books were pretty successful. Those actors are pretty big name. David Fincher's quite well renowned. I'm not quite sure why they didn't succeed enough to get a sequel.
The Swedish films are also quite successful as well.
Yeah, maybe that was the problem. But yeah, I wouldn't have minded another Hulk film, because I quite liked the Mark Ruffalo version. But that would be very much a sequel to the Mark Ruffalo version rather than a sequel to the last Hulk film they actually made, which was just alright.
The one with Edward Norton or whatever.
This might be a more controversial desire, but my desires are unconventional. But I kind of want to know what happens next in Blade Runner 2049.
That's one that I've got on my list, actually, considering I was quite against the concept of there being a sequel to Blade Runner, and then it worked really well, and actually, I'd like to see the story continue. I've got on my list a few kind of, threequels or second sequels or franchises that I would like to continue that already have sequels. So, for example, I'd just like to see another Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man film. It's probably not going to happen because I think Robert Downey Jr. is probably a bit over being Iron Man at this point and is really only doing it in crossover films. But would it just be a good sort of straight up Iron Man with War Machine and no other Avengers?
I would watch that as well, just because I like Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, but I am aware they do seem to be playing him down a bit, perhaps partly because he's clearly, done his time, and partly because, I guess, they want, the MCU to seem fresh, and thinking of the long-term viability, it's in their interest to focus more on the new people rather than just endlessly bringing out Iron Man films.
Yeah, exactly.
But for sure, I would still watch it.
There's lots of stuff that I would like sequels to that I'm 90 to 100% certain are getting sequels, like Spider-Man, Homecoming, Black Panther.
Oh yeah, I've ignored all the ones I know are getting sequels, but I'm pretty sure I don't need to see Arrival 2, even though part of me still thinks they'll probably make it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've got down, is that quite a lot of the films that I really like, and I went back through our back catalogue of all the films we cover in the podcast to prove this. The films that I really like are usually self-contained stories that tell themselves in one film and reveal the entirety of their world and pretty much negate the idea of sequels. As you just said, Arrival is a great example. Colossal, Free Fire, films that really just don't lend themselves to sequels are kind of my favourite. And we've seen what happens with The Matrix when you try to desperately shoe in sequels.
The weird thing about The Matrix is that was obviously made for sequels, wasn't it? I mean, the first one didn't exactly finish the story.
He becomes the god of that universe, and then the rest of him is just easily vanquishing the evil machines. I mean, you don't need to see that, it's just kind of implied.
Yeah, I suppose so. It obviously built up a possible sequel. I wasn't that surprised when they announced it. I didn't think, oh no, they've ruined the perfect Matrix. I just thought, okay, fair enough. Obviously, end result, the sequels were both varying degrees of bad, but I mean, speaking of varying degrees of bad, I mean, Alien Covenant, which I believe we trashed sometime last year, I quite like the cliffhanger. I would still quite happily watch a sequel, or at least I would turn up to a sequel with guarded interest, just because I thought the cliffhanger was kind of memorable. I gather that film was a bit of a flop, but there's a part of me that would like to see the sequel.
Well, it was also in itself a sequel of sorts to Prometheus, which was also a bit of a flop, so... they're going to keep making Alien films. That's on my list as well, but I just absolutely love Alien. I think the original Alien could be my favourite film of all time, so I love it to pieces. So I'm always on board for Alien sequels, even though they've not been very good for a while.
Yeah, I just liked that cliffhanger. Back on my beloved superheroes, I'd like to see the X-Men 3 Bryan Singer would have made instead of buggering off to do a dull Superman film, but I definitely don't need to see a sequel to. That was terrible.
Yeah.
Did you see that, the Brandon Routh Superman?
No, I don't think I did see that, actually, because it got absolutely panned, so I can't judge it.
It's so boring.
Yeah, I believe your opinion chimes with what I've heard from other people.
I mean, Kevin Spacey was clearly having a bit of fun as Lex Luthor, but that was it for positives to that film. It's a shame, as evidenced by his current success as the Atom in the Flammiverse. Brandon Routh is very good at playing this sort of nice guy charisma thing. He would probably do quite well in a sort of Superman and or Captain America part, but the film did not serve him.
No. I did, after thinking for quite a while, I do have a few films that actually I genuinely think sequels would really work for. A lot of them, I think, are films that people wanted to make sequels to, but for various contract negotiations or people being poached to be in other more successful projects, the sequels were never made. So, for example, I think The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the Guy Ritchie adaptation of the suavely dressed 60s spy film, I really, really liked that film. I thought it was great, starring Arnie Hammer. I would definitely be on board for a sequel to The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Similarly, I would like to see more Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law Sherlock Holmes films.
Yeah, that was on my list as well, actually. They keep saying they're about to make that, but then they never seem to manage to actually do it.
Well, that one I think is just basically being stepped on by MCU. And also Guy Ritchie going off to do other franchises like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and also doing his King Arthur movies. I assume they're trying to make franchises out of some of those, as both have a lot of potential for sequels. You know, there's more Arthurian legends they can adapt. They can do more Man from U.N.C.L.E. I don't know. Guy Ritchie, stop starting new franchises. Go back to the franchises you've already started, like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Sherlock Holmes. And while we're at it, Guy Ritchie, you know when you made that really great gangster film, Rock and Roller, and it finishes with whatever the character is, I can't remember, will return in The Real Rock and Roller? Make that film as well. Sequel to Rock and Roller. Go back to all the sequels you promised. So you've got to do The Real Rock and Roller, then The Man from U.N.C.L.E. 2, and then Sherlock Holmes 3.
Is Guy Ritchie actually, against the trends of modern cinema, just someone who doesn't like following up his own work?
I don't know. He did do a sequel to Sherlock Holmes with Sherlock Holmes Book of Shadows. And he does, obviously, Snatch was in many ways a sequel to Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. I know it's different characters, but it's the same cast doing the same thing, just with the addition of Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
And the other thing, actually, film that I liked much more than I thought it would, that probably could stand up for a sequel, is that Power Rangers film. Came out last year. Yeah,
that was on my list as well. It's not massively exciting one, but it definitely felt like, a sort of a pilot to something that could do with a sequel to, see where they take it. I didn't mind that Golden Compass film, although I think, all told, there's probably a better adaptation of Northern Lights out there. I feel like, on the one hand, they could have made a sequel to that okay one, but maybe I'd rather they just wait for a better one. I think the BBC are meant to be adapting it, so maybe that'll actually be good.
Well, yeah, the place where Northern Lights should live is in an epic TV series on Netflix or the BBC. That's where Northern Lights, I think, belongs rather than in the cinema.
Yeah, the film did feel a bit
truncated.
Compromised. Yeah, and obviously there's the James Cameron's 12 million Avatar sequels. I don't know anyone who isn't excited for those.
As far as I'm not particularly on board for more Avatar. Although I would like a follow-up to the the Ghostbusters reboot.
I get the feeling that it didn't make enough money or something. I'm not really sure, but yeah. I liked that film fine. I don't have much emotional attachment to Ghostbusters, although maybe I'd have hated it if I did. Who knows? I
thought that was a good film. I really liked it.
Yeah, it was fun. They were meant to be making a fourth Spider-Man film with Tobey Maguire, which, on the one hand, it might have been better than the Andrew Garfield one we actually got. On the other hand, the third Spider-Man film with Tobey Maguire also wasn't that good.
Well, they tried to shunt the third and fourth ones together. I believe that they wanted to do Sandman for the third one and Venom in the fourth one, but it kind of all got sort of compressed, which was probably one of the issues.
I'm not sure. I thought they wanted to do... Sam Raimi wanted to do Sandman and the Harry Osborn Green Goblin, and then the studio made him stick Venom in it as well, much to the rollicking disappointment of everybody. And then the fourth one, he was going to do John Malkovich as the Vulture.
Oh, was he?
But, at this point, years down the line, we've had Michael Keaton as the Vulture, and that's fine.
John Malkovich as the Vulture would have been interesting. I thought Tobey Maguire was very good in that. And Sam Raimi is a great director.
Oh yeah, but the first two Spider-Man films, especially the second one, are, enduring classics of the subgenre. There seems to have been a sort of a weird reassessment of the third one. I'm still not sure that's actually good, guys. I think that you might just be confused because the Andrew Garfield ones, especially the second Andrew Garfield one, are so boring.
Yeah, I think that just looks better by comparison. But I mean, everyone's probably a bit too old now, but that would, if they could have sustained that franchise rather than breaking it in the early to mid 2000s.
I don't know. Much as I enjoy sequential stuff and franchises and sequels and all that shit that is ruining Hollywood nowadays, I'm not sure that many franchises ever benefit from going beyond 3 films with the same people doing the same thing. I mean, even the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even though it's now up to 20 films, 19, but it will be 20 when Ant-Man and the Wasp comes out. I feel like there is a reason why they seem to be largely cutting the franchises off after 3 films, or in the case of the Avengers films, 4 films, the last 2 of which are basically 1 film.
There's a good point. There's little value in usually going beyond 3, which is why, things like, there's no Iron Man 4.
Yeah, I think, if you're lucky if you can get the third one out without it turning shit. I wait with bated breath to see if they can manage to stick the landing. If they can get the 4th Avengers one in and have it be good, then, I'll be impressed.
I've also got a possibly slightly controversial list, which definitely has one thing, maybe controversial one on it, which is films I'd like to see sequels, but the big caveat is What I want to see is a film basically that picks up the same rough story in the same universe, but with a different cast of characters and different actors. So, for example, one of the ones I've got on this list is Inception. I'd like to see another Inception film, but not with Leonardo DiCaprio and all those characters. Maybe you could pick up one of the supporting parts, like the Joseph Gordon-Levitt character or the Ellen Page character. And the story of people breaking into other people's minds via their dreams and stealing stuff is a great concept. I just think that story about Leonardo DiCaprio was done very well and is clearly concluded. But there's more life in that universe, but just don't give us a direct sequel. Branch out sideways. Yeah, by picking up the story of one of the minor characters. Similarly, I really like the 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later, which did quite a good job again of not using the same characters. So you could do 28 Months Later, especially as there's a sort of cliffhanger ending to 28 Weeks Later.
I haven't seen those films, but I gather they are meant to be a sort of trilogy. They just haven't got around to making the third one for money or practical reasons.
Especially as the second one does have a big cliffhanger, and you can kind of see exactly where the third one's going. And possibly most controversially...
Oh, God.
Well, we'll see. You're either going to agree with this or not agree with this. But it's just, I guess, literally the only two options available.
Don't get excited. I might just not care.
Yeah, that is also quite likely. Okay, so this is a film I would like to see a sequel to, but bear in mind, it's the same universe with all the cool stuff in the universe, but different characters and different actors, right? What I'd like to see is another Serenity, but not with the Firefly Malcolm Reynolds and that. Another part of that universe, I think, would be interesting, but no overlap with Firefly or Serenity.
Oh, right. No, I don't think I need to see that.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, I think I don't know. I just think the appeal of that universe does lie strongly with those characters, and I just don't know if I ever saw the appeal of Firefly / Serenity to be the world building. But yeah.
But I think the characters are too old, and it's been too long for them to do a direct sequel. This is why I think it's controversial. Surely everyone will be shouting, "No, just make more Serenity. Pick up where the last one left off." It's like, no, I think it's done, and everyone's a bit too old now.
I think it's done, yes, but I think it's done, so it's done, not it's done, so let's make a related film with different actors. Honestly, if Joss Whedon and those actors wanted to get together and do something else, well, to be fair, Joss Whedon does work with a lot of Firefly actors, so clearly he's achieving that.
And we've just reviewed a film with Milena Bakarin in it, so
yeah,
their careers continue.
Well, yeah, obviously, film to TV, Firefly is obviously the great, oh god, the unmade possibilities, the unfairness, the early death, but at least he got a film, guys. Most people don't get a film.
No.
I mean, to be honest, but weirdly, when I was reading through the backlist of this podcast, the great unfollowed up thing that I saw outside of films was they never made a second storyline in Cry Havoc, which is a shame, as I liked that comic.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. I liked reading it as well.
I gather it didn't sell very well, so the writer and artist have both moved on to other projects, which... I mean, the other projects are good too, but it's a shame.
Yeah, it's a shame that some of these... I think we've come up with a couple of sequels that I think there's definitely life in. More Sherlock Holmes, more Power Rangers. People are up for that.
Yeah, I don't think Power Rangers did quite well enough to get a sequel. I would definitely watch that Blade Runner sequel, but then again, maybe it was probably tempting fate enough to go back to Blade Runner once, so maybe they were going to cut their losses and back away. I don't gather that film did amazingly at the box office, considering how expensive it obviously is.
Yeah.
I get the feeling it actually... Even though I think they were hoping that the fact that they're doing a sequel to Blade Runner would be a huge pop culture moment, actually it was kind of niche. Turns out Blade Runner isn't actually a widely regarded classic outside of the sci-fi community. So
maybe something with a broader sort of popular appeal, like you get Robert Downey Jr. back for Sherlock Holmes or something.
Which I think they probably will. I mean, now that his Marvel workload has gone down a bit, he's probably got time to actually do other things again. Okay, and thank you for listening to Moderate Fantasy Violence. That was your lot for this fortnight. If you want more, you can go to our website at moderatefantasyviolence.com to find our old episodes, some articles, some deleted clips from our old episodes, and of course a link to our guest appearance on And Then What, which, as I mentioned, you should definitely listen to. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or your podcast provider of choice if you like. We would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
You can also find us on Twitter by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence or our handle at MFV Podcast. You can also find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence, and you'll see our lovely purple logo. You can also find me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, or you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
Yep, and you can find me at NickMB on Twitter, or my website is nickbryan.com, where you can find more details, including my next crime book, which is due out fairly soon after this comes out, plus a new comic I wrote about waking up on Mars, which I was pretty pleased with, and you should definitely check out. Okay, thank you very much for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a very, very necessary sequel. Well, it's a necessary sequel to this episode. It bears consideration whether the actual film is necessary. We will, of course, be covering Solo, a Star Wars story. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, in case you thought I was joking about the Where's My Sex song about socks, I was not. And also what I just said is probably more poetic than that song.